This is Darwin to Jesus. Hope you're all doing well. So a few days ago, the prominent atheist Matt Dillahunty made a video responding to my good friend Drago about whether or not atheism can justify saying that bestiality is wrong. After watching Matt's video, Drago and I decided to record a stream together and we responded to Matt. This is that response. I hope you enjoy. Alright, Drago, are you there?
Daniel, what's happening, man?
Not too much. It's great to see you here. It's my first time talking to a celebrity.
I did. Apparently, you sent me this video overnight, and I do feel like I've elevated my celebrity status. I'm on the targets of some atheists, apparently.
Yeah, you really have. So you actually don't know who Matt Dillahunty is. Is that correct?
No, I've never heard of him. I just saw he had 200,000 subs. So yeah, I'd love to hear what's going on with him. But obviously, I'm just an honor. You've been in the targets of atheists, so you know how that is. But I'm really excited to I feel like I'm earning my stripes.
I think you definitely are earning your stripes. And Matt Dillahunty is a very prominent atheist in the whole new atheist movement. He's been around for at least 15 years, probably more like 25. And I grew up watching him when I was an atheist. I would watch all of his videos and his debates. I thought that he did a great job. He started to get on my nerves a little bit here and there because he was very brash and everything. But overall, I was quite a big fan of his. So it's really interesting to see that he's made this response video to you. It's so funny because last night I was just on YouTube and I was looking for a video to watch because usually I listen to something as I'm going to sleep. And as I am scrolling, I see Matt Dillahunty and there's a tweet. And for some reason, the tweet caught my eye. And it's probably because somewhere in my subconscious, I saw your face. And so I took a closer look and I was like, no way, that's Drago. And so then I clicked play and I started listening to the video. And sure enough, he's responding to your tweet. So I sent you a message last night and I said, hey, did you know that Matt Dillahunty made this response to you? It's so funny. And you didn't know. Nobody had even told you yet. So I was the first one.
No, I appreciate it. It was funny because I started getting these notifications of people commenting on this old tweet. I mean, this was like 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And in Twitter, nothing lasts more than 24 hours. So I'm like, that's weird. What's going on here?
Yeah. So do you want to talk about the tweet before we play this video? And we're basically just going to play it and give our thoughts on it. I think that he did a pretty bad response overall. And there's a lot that I have to say about it. I'm sure you probably do too. But is there anything about the initial tweet that you'd like to say before we get started?
Sure. Yeah. So look, what I'd say, so what's the underlying motive? Like, what's the purpose of the tweet or a tweet like what I did? The purpose is that we have direct perception of fundamental moral intuitions and truths, and that the framework, the worldview, let's say, of atheism, and I specifically say worldview because the belief that God doesn't exist is never occupied solo. It always comes with a handful of other adjacent beliefs. That worldview can't account for those fundamental moral intuitions, even though the atheists will try to rely on them. And Daniel, you've spent a lot of time on the fronts, on the apologetic battlefronts here, discussing that. So I don't need to tell you this. But yeah, so the other thing is, like, this was a tweet. This was meant to start a conversation, and it was fun. It went semi-viral, and this isn't an academic paper with maximum precision. It's borderline a meme. So just like if you go to the store and you look at the packaging of a product, the packaging is there to encourage you to open and get the product. So I just offer that caveat. I think most people understand the purpose of a tweet and a meme, but if you want to treat my tweet as a academic submission, okay, I don't think you'll be as satisfied under that lens.
So in other words, if this was something that you were doing seriously, you might have reformulated it in a different way. But because it's a tweet, you did it in kind of a way that you wouldn't have done if you were trying to get an A at if you were in college or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, of course. And I feel, it's funny that I'd even have to offer that caveat, but that's just in response to the criticism, at least that some commenters have made about, what's an atheistic worldview, and where's the hidden premises about what a worldview is supposed to accomplish, and blah blah blah. It's like, yes, sure, absolutely, I could make that more precise, but I did not for the purpose of what that tweet was set out to do.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that all makes perfect sense. So, are you ready to get into it?
Let's do it. And for those listening, I just had a raw reaction take. So this is my second time watching the video here with Daniel. So hopefully my reactions will be more organized, but I'm really curious to hear Daniel's reactions because I haven't heard his take on this yet.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited to talk about some of this, especially since I am very familiar with Matt Dillahunty. I've watched a lot of his debates. So it's interesting that we're kind of merging right now. He actually blocked me a long time ago. We had one interaction and he blocked me very quickly. So now we're coming together again because he's going after my friend. So it's on, Matt. Let's go ahead and start rolling it. And if you want to interject or anything, Drago, just let me know.
Cool. Sounds good.
All right. Here's the video. And here we go.
The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents the stupidest argument against atheism ever. Yes, it may be. And first of all, I'm already going to say that this video, I probably expect this to get demonetized as a sensitive subject. I'm probably going to speak in code on occasion. And it's embarrassingly stupid that I have to spend any time at all addressing this particular argument.
So I want to pause it right there because I think it's kind of interesting that he's, first of all, acting like he needs to address your argument. And he does say, I don't need to, but I'm thinking there are a lot of arguments that you could address, Matt. Why are you going after this one? And it also is strange to me that he's calling it the stupidest argument possibly ever. It's nowhere near the stupidest argument ever against atheism. Obviously, there are some really, really bad ones. This one, it may not be valid, and we'll get into that, but it is touching on something that is a very big problem for the atheist worldview. So I just wanted to say that from the outset. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's a good freeze frame here because I think, to your point, there's something in Matt that it probably rustled in. Maybe there's certain emotions or feelings about the matter because it is a peculiar post to highlight. So there's something that I said that put this in his focal attention, that he thought it was more important than it actually necessarily needed to be. So yeah, I do find that interesting.
Yeah, I think there is something about this argument that really rubs him the wrong way. And I don't know if we're going to get into his motivations or not, but I think that that's pretty clear. All right, so let's go ahead and listen to a bit more.
Let's do it.
And I suppose, to be fair, I didn't have to.
No, you didn't.
But it's worth showing you just how absolutely ridiculous and immoral some people are on behalf of their religion.
So I want to just pause it right here and say what he's doing. Right now, he's engaging in rhetoric. He's setting the stage. He's framing this. He's already told you the conclusion. He hasn't talked about the argument yet. He's told you out of hand immediately that this is the stupidest argument ever and that you're immoral for even making it. And this is something that a lot of atheists, especially like Matt Dillahunty, engage in. They poison the well immediately instead of saying, here's what this guy said, and then going through it, and then at the end telling you what their thoughts are. They tell you right away at the beginning what their thoughts are and why, you know, how terrible it is. And they give you that frame so that as you go through the argument, you're going to be going through it with that frame. You know, it would be very different if he said, this is a really thoughtful, amazing argument. And then he started going through it. That would definitely change the perception of his audience. So this is something that a lot of people engage in. It's not just Matt. I probably even do it sometimes, but it is worth pointing out that that's what is going on. This is what he's engaging in. And it's not part of the argument whatsoever. This has nothing to do with a response. He's simply poisoning the well and engaging in rhetoric. The argument could be the best argument that's ever been seen, and he could be saying the exact same thing. It wouldn't change anything. Would you agree with that?
I agree. I agree that, you know, to be a successful atheist evangelist, you need to make use of appeals to shame and appeals to ego. So you want you want to set the stage so that anyone who disagrees with you is an idiot or a terrible person. That's part of it, because if you don't have those characteristics, the substance of atheism under a critical lens would collapse. So I think these types of tactics, unfortunately, are par for the course, though there are some atheists who actually avoid doing these. So I do commend those atheists who don't speak this way.
I completely agree. And that's why I want to highlight this, is because some atheists don't engage in this sort of stuff. And I do appreciate that. And I'm sure you just said that you do as well. So unfortunately, Matt, he is only 60 years old and still engaging in this sort of thing. So eventually, maybe one day he'll get there. You know, we can hope. Stranger things have happened. All right, let's continue.
Let's do
it. Here's the post. I left the name there. I don't care.
Oh, I did want to just point out that he's saying how immoral you are, and then he's basically admitting that he purposefully left your name there so that you'll get a bunch of hate, but you're the scumbag. And this is the way that they think, I've noticed, is that if they think that you're bad, then it justifies them doing anything that they want to you. And that seems to be Destiny's logic as well. It's okay to blow your head off as long as I think that you're a bad person. When you get shot defending your family, it's fun. It's hilarious. I'm going to make jokes about it, you know? So I don't know. It's I don't know what Matt Dillahunty's thoughts are on that exactly, but it does seem to be consistent logic for especially the new atheist movement, a lot of them, where they seem to think if you're a bad person, we can just do whatever we want to you. I mean, the honorable thing would just be to talk about the tweet, I think, but especially since you're not a big public figure or anything, you have a much bigger channel than he does, or a much bigger platform.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, let's keep going.
It says, here's a new syllogism refuting atheism. 1, bestiality is wrong. 2, the atheistic worldview cannot establish why bestiality is wrong. Therefore, the atheist worldview cannot be true. The only way the conclusion, 3, can be false is if you disagree that bestiality is wrong, 1, or if you believe that it can be established that it's objectively immoral for sex between 2 different species under the presuppositions of your godless belief system. Are there any courageous atheists who want to attempt refuting either premise? Me, you idiot. Your argument is invalid in structure, unsound, and absolutely one of the dumbest things I've ever read.
Well, he's really flattering you, isn't he?
I think it is quite the compliment here that he was so keen on engaging like that. So yeah, there it is.
Me, you idiot. Oh, it cracks me up. I kind of miss being an atheist when I could just call people names and slander them and that sort of thing and not feel bad about it. I do miss that a little bit. It is kind of fun, but okay, here we go. Hey there, sorry to barge in. I just wanted to say, if you're enjoying the content, please remember to leave a like, comment, make sure you're subscribed, and hit the bell to get notified when I upload a new video. Thank you.
It concludes by saying, because this is what you must be able to do in order to support the viability of your own worldview. No, it's not. You are monumentally confused about absolutely every aspect of this. In 20 years, this is probably the stupidest argument I've ever heard against atheism. So first of all, atheism is the position of not being convinced that a God exists, or in some cases of being convinced that gods don't exist. It isn't a worldview. It does not include moral.
Okay, I want to pause right here. He's not correct when he uses the word convinced. It's actually just a belief. So it's not about being convinced, it's about a belief. If you believe no gods exist, you're an atheist. If you lack a belief that no gods exist on his terms, you're an atheist. Obviously, you're actually just an agnostic, but Matt doesn't understand that agnosticism means that you lack a belief in either direction. So he calls agnostics atheists so that he doesn't need to shoulder a burden of proof, but he can still call himself an edgelord atheist. But it is not about being convinced. You can go into a casino thinking that you will lose, and you know that the odds that you'll win are very close to the odds that you'll lose. So you're not convinced that you'll lose, but you hold a belief that you will lose. And that belief is rational. So if you hold a belief that no God exists, then you are an atheist. It has nothing to do with whether or not you're convinced. You can hold a belief anywhere after 50%. Would you agree with that, Drago?
Can you restate that as something about, you're talking about the 50% threshold of
Yeah, I'm saying that in order to be an atheist, you don't have to be convinced. You can just believe it.
You don't have to be convinced. Well, right, you could believe it based on faith.
Well, no, I mean, what I was saying is if you walk into a casino, okay,
Yeah.
so there's three things that you can believe going into a casino. You can believe you're going to win, you
Right.
can believe that you're going to lose, or you can be on the fence. You can say, I don't know either way. I don't believe either way. Okay.
Right.
So there's the winnest, there's the losest, and then there's the agnostic saying, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't believe either way. So what I'm saying is it's not a matter of being convinced, because you can believe that you're going to lose when you walk into a casino, but you wouldn't say that you're convinced. So atheism is about a belief. It is not about if you're convinced. There's a big difference between being convinced and believing.
I hear what you're saying. I guess the only thing is that in the metaphor, there's a belief that there's an event taking place, like a slot machine is going to happen. And so then the atheist will backpedal and say, well, that's like you believing in God, but I don't believe in a slot machine. Like whatever. But I agree with what you're saying about believing and convince. I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. So Matt, if you ever watch this, there's a difference between being convinced of something and believing something, and just clean up that definition you got there.
Moral decisions or moral conclusions. My morality is rooted in things like secular humanism.
All right. Did you hear that?
His morality is rooted in secular humanism.
Yeah, he said my morality. So this is him no likey. All right. Now, when you said bestiality is wrong, did you mean I don't like bestiality, or did you mean that there's a truth about the matter that transcends whatever our human opinions are?
Of course that it's a truth. Though if I try to give him benefit of the doubt, if we're saying that, like in this case, my morality is the Christian morality, where, even if I were to say that, like I get what you're saying, it sounds subjective. It sounds like me no likey. But someone could, in good faith, use that language, and maybe they don't mean it that way. But I hear what you're saying.
Well, he's not a moral realist. I know for a fact that
Okay.
Matt Dillahunty is a moral subjectivist.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. So he is not making a case for objective morality.
That's interesting. That because when he said he's a secular humanist, I mean that sounds like an appeal to some objective thing. But because I feel like most secular humanists try to prescribe an objective norm, but if you're saying he's just a straight up subjectivist, that's interesting. Okay.
Maybe you haven't talked to very many secular humanists, but I'm yet to meet one that actually says that secular humanism is objective. They all, if you nail them down, they will all, every last one of them, admit that it is based on subjective opinions and group consensus, that it's not objective. I've yet to meet one that thinks that it's objective.
I see. Interesting. So they'll admit that it's just humans making things up, basically.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. They're not appealing to a universal standard. They're just appealing to things that humans like. So humans like well-being, whatever that means. And so then they say, well, because humans like this, then we're going to call this good, and then we're going to form goals around it. And well-being is the goal. And so whatever gets us closer to the well-being goal is good objectively, because we already just arbitrarily set out this goal, which is well-being. So
Yeah.
that's basically the way that they go about it. So if you hear the word objective, they're acting as if their subjective goal that they came up with is just a given. And then from that goal, now there are objectively better and worse things you can do in relation to that goal. But they know, if you actually talk to them and you know what to ask, they know that it's not actually objective because the goal isn't.
Right.
So hopefully that makes sense. So in other words, he is saying my morality. He's talking about subjective morality.
So
Now,
okay. He means it very strictly. I see. So I was giving him the benefit of the doubt of actually being a moral realist, but
no, he's not.
I've never even listened to his stuff. So he was speaking exclusively from a subjectivist lens.
Yes. So as a subjectivist, did he actually, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but he's not actually addressing your argument, correct?
Well, right. Yeah, fair enough. Because he, as we'll see, he spent a lot of time talking about laws and legality, which to me just felt like a red herring, because from a moral realist perspective, that doesn't really matter. But I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So let's listen to a little bit more. So just to recap, he said, my morality
and principles, not in whether or not there's a God, not in whether or not I think there's a God.
So I do just want to say real quick, he said, my morality, I've got my morality, and I have principles that don't have to do with whether or not there's a God. Okay, congratulations. You have stuff that you made up, and other people can have principles that have absolutely nothing to do with your principles that they can make up, and those principles can fully embrace bestiality, pedophilia, racism, you name it. We've seen it. So what about your principles are binding on the rest of us? Absolutely nothing. You're a secular humanist, so there's no transcendent law. So the point that Drago is making, which you either don't understand, Matt, or even worse, you do understand and you're being deceptive here. But the point that he's making is that atheism has no grounds to say that it is actually wrong to have sex with animals. That is what Drago is saying, and he's saying that's a problem. All right. So, Drago, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's great.
All right, let's keep going.
The atheistic worldview, he's claiming that bestiality is wrong. The atheistic worldview can't establish why. Therefore, the atheistic worldview can't be true. That argument is invalid in structure. The premises don't connect. Being as charitable as possible, I would reword this perhaps as a worldview that includes moral precepts that cannot account for the immorality of bestiality is not true. Atheism is a worldview that includes moral precepts that cannot account for the immorality of bestiality. Therefore, atheism isn't true. That would be at least a syllogism that's valid in structure, although it's still unsound. Because first of all, we haven't established that.
So what do you think about that?
No, this was actually the one, like, I'd say legitimate observation, and his attempt at being charitable as well. So actually, I completely agree. And that those are kind of the implicit premises that, again, would, if you force me to be precise, I would go into what's the purpose of a worldview? What does it mean for a worldview to be true or functional or useful or credible? And because atheistic worldview fails to meet that threshold of what's a good worldview, therefore it's a worthless worldview. It should be rejected. So he actually, like I said, this was the only fair thing I thought in the video.
Yeah, I would actually agree with Matt as well here. He is, for the record, correct that the argument that you put forward in its form was invalid, but he can obviously see how the argument would be formulated correctly. And so the correct or valid form of the argument is pretty easy to pick up on. if you've been doing this for a while. And when I saw this tweet initially, I said the same thing to you. I said, hey, that argument that you made, that argument is not valid. You know that, right? And we talked a little bit about it, and you were kind of like, yeah, I know, it's whatever. But I was like, I know what you're trying to say, though. And if you had just reworded it a little bit, it would have been totally valid. So it's fine.
Well, and again, I mean, I'm here to make a tweet that people won't scroll past, like 3 things. I could put 2A, 2B, and, asterisks on that one. It's just like, this kind of misses the point.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why I want to give him credit here, where he does reformulate it correctly instead of just saying, well, it's invalid, so it's not, I'm not even going to address it. So he reformulated it. We appreciate that, to what it basically should have been if you want to be extremely precise, which most of the time, if you're making a real argument and it's not on Twitter, you, of course, should be precise. And I wish that he would give lessons to all the atheists that don't know how to form syllogisms, honestly, because I put out a tweet about 3 weeks ago where I challenged atheists to give me a syllogism with justified premises for why empathy was the grounding or a grounding for objective morality. And I got a lot of responses, and I didn't get a single one with a syllogism and justified premises. So he needs to do a lot of work with his own base on how to form syllogisms, I would say. But anyway, let's I do want to talk a little bit about worldviews. So he said atheism is not a worldview. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So look, I mean, the fundamental questions of life: who am I? What is a good life? What does it mean to be human? Does God exist? What's the origin? What's our final destination? Like, all these things are wrapped. They're a network of beliefs that influence each other. So if you just try to surgically remove belief in God, that necessarily is going to affect the idea of, like, do humans have dignity, purpose, like all this stuff. You can't just remove the God question and then leave everything else unaffected. Like, they're all intertwined. And so the atheist who's not self-aware will assume you could just flip the switch on the one belief, God exists, God doesn't exist, and somehow everything else remains exactly the same. It's just nonsense.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what we're saying, just to be very clear, is that the belief in whether or not God exists is fundamental to all of the other beliefs that you hold. It's foundational. It's going to touch on all of them. This isn't a flippant belief like, do I have 7,000 blades of grass in my front yard or 8,000? Okay, that might be a belief that you hold, and you could overturn that and it wouldn't affect any of your other beliefs. Probably it's a very low level belief. It's like a leaf on the tree of beliefs, right? It's exterior. It basically touches nothing. It's by itself. It doesn't matter if you change your mind on it. But there are other beliefs that are at the very center of all the other beliefs, like the trunk of the tree. And that trunk is basically God. I would actually argue that the soil that the tree rests in is whether or not God exists. That's how fundamental this belief is. So to say that, I just don't believe in God, but it's not a worldview. Yes, it is. It absolutely is. Now,
Right.
does that mean you're all going to agree on everything? No. But theism is a worldview. That's not even disputed. So why is theism a worldview? Because it is a fundamental belief that's going to affect all of your other beliefs in certain ways. And atheism is a fundamental belief that's going to affect all of your other beliefs in certain ways. Human dignity goes out the window if you're an atheist. You cannot justify it. Free will pretty much goes out the window. You really can't justify it on atheism. The idea of a soul and objective morality and purpose and meaning, intrinsic meaning, all these things go completely out the window on an atheistic worldview. So I do want to just address that. All right, let's continue here.
Let's do it.
Bestiality is immoral, We haven't established that atheism, we have established, in fact, is not a worldview that includes moral precepts. So you cannot take something that does not make a moral pronouncement on something and say that it can't be true. It might be the case that there is no God and that it is still, in fact, immoral. Atheism doesn't have to give an accounting for morality.
Okay, so I want to stop it here. Atheism does not have to give an accounting for morality. What does atheism have to give an accounting for? Anything? What do you think, Drago?
What does atheists have to give an account? What is
Nothing? Nothing.
No.
That's the game he's playing. What does theism have to give an accounting for? Nothing. But the whole point of a worldview, the whole point of a system of beliefs is that it is supposed to reflect our basic understanding and observation of the world. And we all know that certain things are actually wrong, regardless of opinion. So if one guy says, I don't like rape, and another guy says, I like to rape, I rape all the time, is he actually wrong for raping, or is it just a difference of opinion? We all know that he's actually wrong, that raping is actually wrong. Even if he enjoys it, even if he thinks there's nothing wrong with it, it's still wrong. It wouldn't matter if everybody on the planet said raping is fine, go ahead and rape, raping is good. It would still be wrong. And we all know that deep down. So that is what you're trying to address with your argument, is that we have a fundamental experience that needs to be explained. That experience is that there are objective moral facts. And atheism cannot explain this reality that there are objective moral facts. Would you agree with that, Drago?
100%.
Okay. Do you have anything to add on that?
I mean, you summed it up. It's a fundamental experience, and atheism can't account for that experience. So I think the only way to be an atheist and consistent is to reject that fundamental experience as being a mere hallucination or an illusion.
Right.
Because you have no way to account for it.
Yep. And but I do just want to point out that no worldview has to account for something. You can have a worldview and it can be totally absurd. You're allowed to do that. You're allowed to believe in things that make no sense. You're allowed to believe that bestiality is fine and there's nothing actually wrong with it, Matt. We can't stop you, but we are going to say, hey, your worldview can't actually account for moral facts like bestiality is wrong. And we can say that, and we can hope that other people that have common sense and understand that moral facts exist will listen and say, oh, yeah, you know what? You're right. Atheism can't account for bestiality being wrong. What an absurd worldview. I'm not believing that. All right, let's continue here.
Essentially, this is the only way to say bestiality is wrong is to appeal to my proposed moral source, but that's also not true. I remember in the debate that I did years ago with Saitan Briggencate.
So, real quick, it is true. It is true. And that's why you're a subjective moralist and you try to play this game, Matt, where you act as if subjective morality can account for moral facts when you know that it can't. There are no moral facts on atheism, and you're not even a moral realist yourself. So I don't know how deceptive and dishonest you can be, frankly, but you know, based on your own position, that atheism cannot account for moral facts.
It's interesting because, again, usually like the moral subjectivists I found are perfectly content saying, yeah, it's all made up, there's nothing, and they embrace it. But this is the first time I've seen someone so prominent be a moral subjectivist, as you say, yet still try to maintain some sort of moral high ground, some sort of, as if there are real moral facts. It's really weird.
It takes someone with a really, really big ego, I think, to say you're a moral subjectivist and then act as if you have the moral high ground still. But let's continue.
He presented basically one lone argument, and that is, it is reasonable to believe that which is true. It's true that God exists. Therefore, it's reasonable to believe that God is true. And he rightly assumed that I would be addressing his second premise. But the first premise is also false, as somebody pointed out during the QA, and I've mentioned several times. It's reasonable to believe something is true is not the case.
Okay, I'll let him finish here.
Because something could be true, and yet you might not have good reason to believe it. It might be true that I have, a $5,000 or $10,000 sitting on my desk, but you don't have any good reason to believe that. I wish I had a good reason to believe that. I don't have a good reason to believe that.
So I think he's wrong here, actually. I think that the truth is always necessarily reasonable. And if you were to try to argue against that, you would have to use your reasoning as if your reasoning could get you to the truth in order to get that truth, that the truth could be unreasonable, which wouldn't make sense. It would be inherently contradictory. So I don't agree with him here. I think that the truth by definition must be reasonable. And if you think that it could not be, then what is there even to discuss? Why are we even debating? What is a debate? It's reasoning. So you'd have to use your reasoning in order to come to a truth that isn't reasonable. I think that all truth is reasonable. What might seem unreasonable is if you have a system of belief where the truth seems unreasonable based on your other beliefs, which are wrong. But if you have a perfect system of beliefs that are all in accordance with reality, I don't think that the truth would ever seem unreasonable. And even if it did seem unreasonable, it wouldn't in fact be unreasonable. It would be reasonable. It's the truth. What do you think, Drago? You have any thoughts on that?
The way I took his statement was the map and the territory distinction. So the territory exists. That's objective truth. Like the lake is there, the waterfall is there. And then our ability to know the truth is the map. And so to me, I didn't have any issue with the statement of something can be true, but my ability to reason my way to that truth might be impaired. I don't, because for example, like God knows the full extent of truth, but there's certain truths that the human mind cannot reason because we don't have an ability to get there. But even though it is true, so I suppose sticking in materialist terms like he did, it could theoretically be true that in Mars there's like a buried chest of gold. And maybe that's true, but I have no way of knowing that right now. There's no way for me to reason my way to that with confidence. And that's how I took it. I'm like on the surface, like fine, like something might be true, even if we have no way of knowing that it's true. But I didn't really understand why he brought that up into this discussion.
That's another thing that I wanted to mention that has nothing to do with your actual argument. He's just kind of gish galloping a little bit, moving from one thing to another. But he said that the truth is not reasonable. But what you're talking about is that the truth is not knowable. Two different things. I agree that something can be true and we might not know that it's true. But is the truth ever unreasonable? I don't think so.
And I get, and not to deviate too far, but I would be curious then, what does it mean for it to be unreasonable? Is he saying that something can be true, but that you could have no good reasons, even in theory, that it just is what it is without any reasons? I guess that exceeds the scope of the critique, but it's just unclear. I don't even know why bring that up here.
Yeah, let's continue.
The mere fact that something is true is not what makes it reasonable. What makes it reasonable is the case for accepting that it's true. So I was wrong there. This person's doing kind of the same thing. They're saying bestiality is wrong because they want to smuggle in feelings about things and circumvent an actual logical argument. So,
okay, you smuggler, you. Are you trying to smuggle in feelings? You dirty smuggler.
Here's where he's like partially right, but really missing the plot. If you want to call a fundamental intuition and perception of like goodness, like morality, if you want to call it a feeling, sure, that is a feeling, but that's the whole point. Like base intuitions of goodness, truth, and beauty are like the raw materials of knowing anything. And so if you want to say, oh, it's feelings coming in, okay. But obviously I know what he's trying to reduce it and kind of dismiss the concept of intuition, while ironically, he will later rely on that same intuition when he starts talking about consent and all these other beautiful ideals.
Yeah, absolutely. He just thinks that it's subjective, but the base experience is that it is not, that there are facts about this. That is our actual experience. You go ask 100 people on the street, hey, is it wrong to molest children regardless of anyone's opinion? What are they going to say? Yes, it is. Obviously. Why would you even ask such a thing? So our fundamental human experience is that moral facts do indeed exist. So this reminds me of the meme that I have made where it's this hippie looking atheist and he's saying, hey man, in order for me to believe that God exists, you have to prove that it's wrong to molest a child. Can't do it, huh? Well, I guess I win. And it's like, really? I have to prove that to you? You don't just know it already automatically? I've got to prove to you that it's wrong to molest a child. Interesting.
Right.
It's actually quite the cell phone, if you ask me. But
Yeah.
let's continue.
So when they say, are there any courageous atheists who want to attempt refuting either premise? First of all, I'll refute the structure of your argument. Your argument is not a valid argument. This is not up for debate or anything else. Your argument structure is invalid.
We concede that. We concede it. But address the argument that you know he's making.
Presented an incredibly stupid structure. That said, premise number one, bestiality is wrong or bestiality is immoral. What ends up happening is when you smuggle in something like this, you rely on manipulating people's feelings in order to try to avoid the problems with your own argument.
I mean, it's interesting he's saying this because he was manipulating the audience's feelings when he started talking about how this is the stupidest argument ever and that you're immoral. But apparently when you point out that bestiality is actually wrong, well, you're not allowed to do that. But he can manipulate people's feelings from the outset. But if a Christian appeals to something that we all know that's basically universally understood and agreed upon, that's not all right. Shame on you, Drago.
Shame on me. Well, great point as far as the hypocrisy there. And the only thing I'd say is like, it's not, of course, it's not a manipulation. I'm not injecting the appeal to intuition in an effort to cloud and redirect and create confusion. On the contrary, I'm merely trying to illuminate that raw human experience and provide the best explanation for it. So I'm actually trying to shine a spotlight rather than throw in obstacles and manipulate.
Right. I'd say he's the one that's trying to manipulate. He's actually saying that you're bringing up emotional stuff when really this is a fundamental experience that needs to be explained. It needs to be explained on every worldview because it's so fundamental and true for all of us. We all have these moral intuitions. And so him just saying that you're trying to appeal to intuition, or appeal to emotion, I think is incredibly disingenuous, frankly.
Sure, for sure.
This is the same thing that happened when Daniel, in one of our debates,
he knows my name. I'm just kidding.
I was just saying, he debated you.
That's trying to make a big deal about the fact that I said I wouldn't make sex between 9-year-olds, for example, illegal. What I'm willing to make a law about is more about what I think the effectiveness of a law should be and what punishment there should be.
What do you think, Drago? Do you think it should be illegal for 9-year-olds to have sex with each other?
Oh my gosh. You know my stance on that. Obviously, yeah. Look, hey man, I'm a Catholic. Catholics have the strictest rules on what constitutes God-ordained sexuality. So,
who do you blame though? Who do you punish? The parents?
Yeah, right. This is where I'm like, why does he even start talking about laws here? I kind of started.
It really doesn't matter. I think he would agree. He would agree, of course, that laws can be immoral. So it really doesn't matter. All right, let's continue.
That it was not in any way me saying that sex between 9-year-olds should be considered moral.
Okay, so I just want to remind everybody that he's supposed to be saying his position on premise one. He's talking about premise one, is bestiality wrong? And he's bringing up that he doesn't think it should be illegal to have sex with 9-year-olds. What does that have to do with whether or not bestiality is wrong. You either admit and concede the premise, or you say why the premise is wrong, Matt. I shouldn't have to explain this to you. What does the legality of 9-year-olds having sex have to do with the first premise? Am I missing something here, Drago?
Yeah, beats me.
All right, let's continue.
Or legal, just because I was saying that I wouldn't make a law about it. Now, what's going to happen now is they're going to say, oh, you wouldn't make it illegal to have sex with sheep. Well, actually, yes. We're talking about that very thing right now. But whether or not you want to make something illegal is independent of whether or not something is immoral.
Yeah, and you didn't say anything about legality. So why are you bringing it up, Matt? Nobody here in this argument mentions the word legal. So why are you talking about legality? It's a mystery.
And to preempt this, and he starts talking about the Bible too, which we can have a Bible discussion, but in nowhere am I making an appeal to the Bible here either.
Right.
Law isn't merely based on immorality. There are things that we consider to be immoral that we make illegal, and there are things that we make illegal whether or not they're immoral.
Correct.
And there are things that we consider to be immoral that we don't make illegal, or we shouldn't, perhaps. Maybe somebody's going to start making more laws about whether or not infidelity is illegal. I know it's still on the books in some cases, but largely we've done away with laws about infidelity being illegal.
Now, I really want him to actually address the first premise. Is it wrong to make love to animals? Is that wrong? Is it actually wrong?
So what's been asked here is for someone to justify. Actually, they wanted an atheist to refute either premise. Premise one, bestiality is wrong. I think it's wrong too.
Okay, so he concedes the first premise. That's all he needed to say. I concede the first premise. I think that it's wrong. Can you ground it on atheism? That's the question.
Right.
Can you ground how objective facts can exist without a God? Let's see.
Yep.
But it's not. I don't think it's wrong because of any atheistic position. There's nothing about atheism that says it's wrong.
Yes, there absolutely is. The thing about atheism is that it removes the one thing that you would need in order to justify and account for objective moral facts and duties. So atheism absolutely cannot ground objective moral facts and duties, and we're going to see that. Here we go.
That's not where my morals come from. That's not
my morals. My morals. We didn't ask about your morals, Matt. We asked, is bestiality wrong, regardless of your opinion, regardless of your morals? Because we're talking about facts here. We're talking about moral facts. Obviously, people who like to have sex with animals wouldn't say that bestiality is wrong. We're talking about, is it wrong regardless of what those people think? And that would also mean regardless of what you think, Matt. There has to be a transcendent truth above all of us saying that it's wrong in order for it to be wrong, which you know.
Right.
Any thoughts, Drago?
No, I'm with you on that.
All right.
It's based on, and that's not what atheism is. My reasoning is based on something that you overlooked. And also, when you go back to the Daniel Hakikachu, Michael Jones debate over child marriage, something that they both overlooked and neither mentioned. Consent. Consent is the cornerstone of everything having to do with interpersonal relationships. Having
kind
to
of
do
sounds
with
like an objective moral fact, right?
Thinking being.
Well, no, he's really just giving us his opinion that consent is something that's important. It's a principle that he cares about. But if you ask him, is it actually objectively wrong to violate someone's consent? He would say no. I'm telling you, I know for a fact that Matt Dillahunty is not a moral realist.
Oh no, I'm not suggesting. No, I'm not suggesting that you're wrong. What I'm saying is that here's how he's trying to use the resources of a moral realist while still, and then when you're going to call him out on it, he'll duck back and retreat into his subjectivist thing. So
Yeah.
He's assuming that the reader also agrees that consent is an important thing and that we all should value consent. I mean,
Right.
otherwise, why talk about it? He's
Yeah.
bringing it up because he thinks it is objective, even though he's denying, right? Like you said, he's a subjectivist.
Here's the $1 million question. Actually, I have $2 million questions for Matt. First question is, why is it wrong on atheism, if there is no God, why is it wrong, actually wrong, to violate someone's consent? And the second question, this might be a $3 million question. Is it possible to give your consent if you do not have free will? I would like to have an answer to that.
They can't answer that. That's great. These are, those are the money questions.
Yep. So Matt, you wanted to ask a question at the end. You've got 2 questions that we would like to have answered. If you ever watch this, 2 questions. All right, let's continue.
Do you have informed, enthusiastic consent, uncoerced consent? When you ask me, why do I think bestiality is wrong? It's because there is not a way that I can tell that you could get informed, enthusiastic, non-coerced consent from non-human animals.
Yeah, so I just want to point out to everybody that all he's done right here is said, I think that it's wrong to do X. I've reasoned that it's wrong to do X because I value consent. But anybody else can come along with a different opinion and they can say it's good to violate other people's consent. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Or they can also say animals can consent. Or they can say it doesn't matter, moral facts don't exist. If I want to make love to an animal, I'm going to. The question is not what do you personally think, Matt? What have you personally reasoned to? Because people do horrible things all the time and they have reasons for why they do what they do. So we don't care about your reasoning, Matt. We care about your fundamental justification for saying that bestiality is actually wrong. And you have not given that to us. You've given us a subjective framework that means nothing in this conversation. And you're actually conceding the first premise. Actually, you're conceding the second premise. And you're not being honest about your opinion on the first premise, because you should say bestiality, I don't think that it's wrong, because me no likey is not the same thing as wrong. Me no likey is me no likey. So when I see somebody putting milk in their coffee, I don't say that's wrong. Even though I drink my coffee black and I think milk and coffee is disgusting, I don't say it's wrong for them to do that, because it's not. It's just something I don't like. Okay. In order for it to be wrong, there has to be an actual truth about the matter. And you're a moral subjectivist. That means you don't believe in moral truths. So what are you even talking about, Matt?
Yeah, you said, like you said, his value in here saying he values consent. Okay, but maybe John Smith values ruthless assent and imposition of power and force.
Right.
Yes. Okay.
It's all just, and anybody can come up with any values and reason however they want about why they think those values are good. We can all just make things up all day long. What does that have to do with whether or not it's actually wrong to have intimate relations with an animal, Matt? That's what I would like to know. We'd all like to know that, but we're not going to get an answer.
That's it. You can tap dance around. You can say all the other things. But what if I could get consent? Okay, keep playing your fantasy land.
So I love this. I want the answer to that question as well. That's clearly the implication, that if morality is based on consent and animals could give consent, then it would be fine to have sex with them. There'd be nothing wrong with it whatsoever. The only thing that's stopping Matt from having sex with animals, well, I don't know, maybe he doesn't like animals, but the only thing that Matt would say, hey, don't have sex with animals, is because they can't give their consent. I kind of think that having sex with animals is wrong whether or not they can give consent. What do you think, Drago?
Well, when you expose it that way, I have to chuckle because, he went with like the whole, oh yeah, if you're even talking about the topic, you must be fantasizing about it. Kind of like how activists in the, rainbow side will say, if you're pro heterosexual marriage, you must secretly be in the closet or something. So yeah, maybe there are some fantasies at work here that we didn't realize. So fair enough.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. So let's see. Do you think he's even on the second premise? I think he's on the first premise still, and he has not refuted the first premise. He has brought up his subjective me no likey. He has not shown why it's actually wrong on atheism to have sex with an animal. All right, let's continue.
Consent is the key. That's why I think it's wrong.
See, there we go. That's why I think
What
it's
if-
wrong. That's he's admitting right here. And like I said, I know for a fact that he's a moral subjectivist. So what you think doesn't matter. We're not saying that if you're an atheist, you can't say words like, I think X is wrong. That's not the argument, Matt. That's not what it says. It says it is wrong. That means that it's wrong regardless of what you think or what I think. So we're not arguing that you can't say, well, me no likey, or I think it's wrong, or I think it's objectively wrong. We're arguing you can't make sense of that on your worldview. And have you? No, you haven't. You're a subjective moralist.
So Daniel, briefly, you mentioned $1 million question and a $3 million question. I would also add maybe a $500,000 question. So not
All
quite
right.
at that tier. And it's that, is consent the only thing keeping you separate from the animal there? Because I think that is interesting. He literally said that it just comes down to consent. Now maybe he has other reasons that he didn't mention, but this is what you just brought up, and it's worth asking. Is that really the only reason why he thinks it's wrong?
Yeah, I think it would be. And it's really just kind of an arbitrary thing on atheism, especially since he's a determinist as well. He doesn't believe in free will. He probably calls himself a compatibilist, but everybody knows that that's a bunch of
It's like believing in Santa Claus or something. Yeah.
Well, it's semantics.
Right. No, this was
Because
just retelling.
because they're just redefining what free will means and then saying, well, look, we can have free will on determinism, but they're just redefining free will. So there is no third way. There's two ways. Either you have free will or you don't. It's that simple. And he
Right.
doesn't believe in free will. So all this stuff is really very silly. Even talking about morality when you don't believe in free will, I think is incredibly silly, because morality is based on the fundamental assumption that we are responsible for our decisions, that we're not just rocks rolling down hills, but that we have agency. That's why we don't hold people accountable for their horrible actions when we think that they're crazy.
Yeah.
Because we delineate between, here's a crazy person who was not in their right mind, and here's a person who was in their right mind and they decided to do evil. But if the truth of the matter is that no one has control, that all of our actions are predetermined, why are we talking about morality? What does it matter? So
Right.
Let's continue.
For sure.
If you only think it's wrong because you think your God is opposed to it, then you're not providing any justification for anyone. You're just making an assertion that you seem to know how your God feels about it, and that any of us should care how your God feels about it. The God of the Bible, for example, whether real or not, got a lot of things wrong, like slavery.
Okay, so now he is doing the tu quoque fallacy. And you also, what does the Bible have to do with whether or not atheism can ground objective morality and the fact that bestiality is wrong? What does that have to do with the argument? The argument is not Christianity can ground objective morality and atheism can't. The argument says nothing about Christianity. The argument says nothing about the Bible. So why is the Bible coming up? The Bible has absolutely nothing to do with this argument. Even if everything he says about the Bible is totally correct and Christianity is false, even if all that was granted, it would have nothing to do with this argument. So just pay attention. He's about to waste, I think, the rest of the time.
Slavery, like gender equality, like advocating for the slaughter of another community while keeping their virgin girls as a prize. Not only do I think that bestiality is wrong, primarily on the foundation of consent and bodily autonomy, I actually have a preferred penalty. I think that it should probably be a misdemeanor type classification where you are sent for clinical psychiatric evaluation treatment in addition to perhaps a fine. There you go. I don't know if it's the right solution or not.
So when we listen to people like this, when I listen to people like this, I just want to point out that he is smart enough to know that the argument is not about whether or not he thinks morality, or he thinks bestiality is wrong. He's smart enough to know that that's not what the argument is about. So he's just being blatantly dishonest here and straw manning the argument, because the argument isn't, once again, I just want to point this out. The argument is not atheists cannot say bestiality is wrong. Saying bestiality is wrong and atheism cannot account for that fact on their worldview, right? And he understands that. He's been in this game long enough, and he's not stupid. I don't think that Matt Dillahunty is stupid. So he understands what's being said, and he's misrepresenting the argument and acting like he is able to account for the first premise on his worldview just by saying, I think that bestiality is wrong. And that doesn't actually answer the question. Ground objective moral facts, Matt, on your worldview. Any thoughts, Drago?
No, I mean, I agree. Throughout the whole thing, he's a subjectivist, but somehow trying to also represent or give atheists who are objectivists a reason to think that the argument fails. I mean, yeah, it's strange.
Yeah, I mean, it's like if you said it's wrong to drink your coffee with milk in it. Atheism cannot account for why it's wrong to drink your coffee with milk in it. Therefore, atheism cannot be true. Okay. And he's saying, well, I don't like to drink my coffee with milk in it. So I think that it's wrong, but it should just be an opinion. It should just be an opinion. And that's how morality is on a subjectivist lens. It's opinion. There are no facts. There are no moral truths. There's not a single one. If you believe in a single moral truth, you are not a moral subjectivist. You are a moral realist, period. End of story. But Matt is not a moral realist. And that's why he keeps saying, I think. We don't care. Ground objective moral facts on your worldview, Matt.
I haven't spent a whole lot of time about this, to be honest.
Yeah, you don't say.
Outside of somebody posting a meme like this, it's not something that I spend a lot of time thinking about.
What I love is that he called it a meme here, which is actually reasonably accurate.
Yeah, he seems to know it's a meme, and yet he's treating it like it's a real argument. And I mean, it is somewhat a real argument. Really, the argument is that atheism cannot account for objective moral facts and duties. That's really the argument, if you actually think about it. Wouldn't you agree?
Correct. And interestingly enough, I mean, even as I framed it here, I said you have to like give up premise one or or two, and he's voluntarily conceding premise one, as you pointed out. So in that case, like, okay, so what are you really arguing against? Because you agree with me that you have to let go of premise one, and he's gladly doing it, right? You said he's a subjectivist, so
yeah,
that's fine. I'm saying you can be a subjectivist atheist, like go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I want to read this. So premise one says bestiality is wrong. Did he say that it's actually wrong, or did he say me no likey? He said me no likey. So right. He acted like he agreed with premise one, but in fact he does not agree with premise one because he doesn't believe in objective moral values and duties. So that was very disingenuous and dishonest of him. He needs to actually make a choice. Am I going to be a moral realist or not? The second premise says the atheist worldview cannot establish why bestiality is wrong. Has he established why bestiality is wrong, or has he given us his opinion of why he personally thinks that it's wrong? He's given us his opinion, but an opinion is not the same thing as establishing why something is wrong, independent of opinion. So he was dishonest about premise one, and he's completely failed to establish why moral facts would exist on premise 2, and he's acting as if he has done that, but he hasn't. He's just given us his opinion. So he has so far conceded the entire argument, and now he's talking about the Bible, which has nothing to do with the argument.
Right.
Somebody decides to make a law about it. And then I'm like, okay, what's the justification for this? Because I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it being illegal. I'm okay with it being viewed as immoral. So I've told you that your argument is invalid in structure. It is.
Yep, it is. We agree. But you know what it meant. You know what he was trying to say.
It is. That is invalid in structure. Then you wanted refutations of either premise. It's pointless to try to refute a premise when the argument is invalid in structure. But I did.
That is not true. You can absolutely refute an argument if you understand what the argument is trying to say. So, and that's why you actually did respond to the argument, because you knew what he was trying to say. So you're able to respond. And this happens quite often where someone will get a word slightly wrong in a syllogism. The syllogism is not technically valid, but you know that there is a form of the syllogism that is valid. It's not that difficult to come up with a syllogism. So you can just restructure it slightly and address the correct version to be charitable, which is what you did. So I don't know why you're saying that you shouldn't have or something.
I know he was halfway there. He actually framed it early on in the charitable way. And then rather than, deal with that, he went back to the straw man red herring stuff.
Yeah, it's strange. He really floundered on actually addressing the premises.
Yeah.
Make my case for how, as an atheist, I can rely on principles of secular humanism for bodily autonomy and consent.
Yeah, and Hitler can rely on all the principles that he wants to in order to violate people's rights and do what he wants. So everybody can do whatever things they decide that they want to do. They can prioritize whatever they want. They have their values. We don't care what you think, Matt. We don't care about what you have reasoned. We care for the justification for objective moral facts. That's what we're interested in. Everybody can have an opinion. Is that all you're advocating? Yes, it is. Why not be honest about it?
Yep.
To say that bestiality is, in fact, immoral, and that I'm okay with it being illegal, and that I have at least some idealized penalty and classification of that as a misdemeanor.
So me no likey, and I think it should be illegal because me no likey, therefore I can account for premise 2 and say that it's wrong. That doesn't follow, Matt. Me no likey and I want to make it illegal doesn't add up to my worldview can account for objective moral facts like bestiality is wrong. It's a simple non sequitur. Okay? You're trying to put two things together, and you're smart enough to know that this doesn't work. I think. Maybe you're not. Maybe you are so lacking in conversations about the moral argument that you think that this works, but it does not work. It doesn't even come close. What do you think, Drago?
It's a shame that he was closer to the truth. And I think over time, especially in my understanding, he's been away from this path, all right, for some long period of time. I think the brain and the closeness to truth starts to get fuzzy, and in some sense, people become more disintegrated, disconnected. So it's possible that in this conversation, like one sentence at a time, he might actually truly believe what he's saying, not realizing how disconnected and disjointed it is, because that's what happens to your thinking when you stray away from God. Is it starts getting disconnected and the coherence it turns into chaos. So it's just a sad thing to think about.
It is sad. And I know that this guy enjoys calling people idiots. He enjoys speaking down to Christians. He enjoys being smug. And obviously, deep down inside, he's totally miserable. So it's unfortunate. He needs to repent. But
well, maybe there's an opportunity. We'll see. Maybe with this engagements here, he can have a fresh look at it. God willing, we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the God of the Bible, whether is real or not, got a lot of things wrong.
Got a lot of things wrong, or got a lot of things wrong according to you, Matt? According to how we currently see things. Current year. It's current year, everybody. We have figured out all the correct answers to all the moral questions, and whatever God wasn't in agreement with must be wrong. I mean, that's really what he's saying, isn't it? I mean, wrong according to what standard? According to what objective standard, Matt?
Right. The most honest thing is if he just says, I don't like
Yes.
the way I understand the God of the Bible to be behaving.
Exactly. That would be the honest way of saying it. But that completely removes the force of what he's trying to say.
Of course.
But that is all he's got.
Exodus 22:19 says that whoever lies with a beast shall surely be put to death. So Drago, are you advocating for the death penalty for bestiality?
Well, Drago, are you advocating for the death penalty for bestiality?
Sure, why not? Completely irrelevant question, but
Yeah.
Because he basically he's like,
it really
okay,
doesn't
so
matter.
If you're gonna be a Christian, Bible guy, then you're going to be required to believe everything that my interpretation of the Bible says, and that includes that you think society should be run exactly like the Israelites in the same rules. That's what you have to believe. Obviously, that's not what I have to believe, but sure. I mean, I think society's better without bestiality.
Yeah.
It's fine. I really don't care to answer the question. If you want death penalty, sure. Well, actually, as a Catholic, I don't know if I can support death penalty anymore. That's a broader discussion, but anyway.
Yeah, the crucial thing here, though, is that if God said that bestiality should be punished with the death penalty, and that wasn't just for the Israelites, that was for everyone, then that would be the fact of the matter, whether or not Matt Dillahunty agrees with it or not. That is what is not being said here, but should be said because that is an obvious fact. If God says that it's wrong and he owns everything and he's supreme, if he's in charge, then that's the way that it is. It doesn't matter what we think. It doesn't matter what anybody thinks. It only matters what God thinks. God is the owner. So,
right.
Let's go ahead and continue.
Are you so desperate? Because you can't provide evidence for your God. You can't provide sufficient evidence for any of the things that you say about your supernatural beliefs, about your God, about your holy book. You can't demonstrate that the doctrinal things are true. And so your only thing that you can do is to try to attack atheism. And you're doing it in one of the stupidest ways I've ever seen.
Yeah, you big stupid head.
So if you're going to be...
Why are you so stupid? So the whole, I haven't seen any evidence. This is what Matt does. You're not familiar with him, but he acts like the fact that he doesn't see any compelling evidence means that there is no evidence. So it's the whole evidence game. I don't think that there's any good reason to believe in God. Therefore, there must not be any good reason to believe in God. You haven't demonstrated it to me. Therefore, it is not demonstratable. And he is the supreme judge of what counts as being good evidence or what counts as a good argument. He gets to judge that. And if you disagree with him, you're wrong. That's his whole frame here. And that's the way that he argues.
Just give me the evidence, man. I believe, I promise. I will.
Yeah.
Consistent. If the Bible's penalty in Exodus 22 is death, then you should be advocating for people to be put to death whenever they're convicted of this. By the way, that's the penalty in Exodus. There's a different penalty in Leviticus. Leviticus chapter 20, verses 15 and 16 is really weird. Because if a man has sex with an animal, you're to put the man to death and you put the animal to death. Oh, by the way, it also says if a woman does this, you're to put the woman to death and the animal to death. Now, what's weirder, that we're going to also kill the animal who's seemingly an innocent victim in all this, or that we had to specifically include language that the same penalty applies if a woman does this? This is right down to absolute the insanity of the Bible, holding men and women to completely different standards, different value. I've already done a video you can go find on my channel about the Bible's take on women. But it's weird that we had to include, there's the penalty is the same. You have to kill the person. You could have just said kill the person, but nope, we had to kill the man, and we had to kill the woman, and we had to kill the animal.
So, do you have any thoughts on this, Drago?
I mean, we've like long departed from the core argument. Okay, he has an interpretation
in the Old Testament.
Right. He has an interpretation on how he thinks the Bible is portraying a man, women, and which again he thinks is not just a personal meno-likey, but he's actually suggesting it's violating something truly bigger than that, while not actually admitting that that's what he's doing. So we've kind of the ship has sailed from where this whole thing started.
Yeah, I totally agree. So he really doesn't say anything that has anything to do with the argument for the rest of the time on here. So I don't think that we need to play this out. We've already been going at this for over an hour. So I say we just call it here. If anybody would like to go and listen to the rest of his diatribe against the Old Testament, you can go do that. But it has nothing to do with the actual argument that he's supposed to be addressing. So he just happens to really enjoy telling us his personal opinions about the Old Testament, which makes him like almost every other atheist that I've ever talked to. So thank you for your opinions on the Old Testament, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm like different where I hate sound, like I never would want to sound like an NPC, let's say. But it is funny when you say it like these, like, well, did you know in Exodus and Leviticus? It's just like, it's just getting kind of boring and like old. Like try to be a little more creative than that. If you're an atheist, please. It's like,
yeah, and he's been doing this for 20 years, more than that. I think I'm pretty sure it's at least 20. He's been doing it since at least 2008, at least. So it's strange, but when you hate God, I mean, this is the whole frame, is that I know better than God. God said this in the Old Testament, and I think that that's silly. So I must be smarter than God. You know that Matt, if he found out that God did in fact say these things, he wouldn't be like, oh, I guess I was wrong about that stuff, because God does in fact exist and God would be all knowing. He would still think that he knew better than God and that God was ridiculous. That's how foolish he is.
Well, the underlying spirit, I suppose, and for any rebellion in God towards God, whether we realize it or not, is a Luciferian spirit, which is exactly what you said. It's, I know better. I don't believe in God's vision or God's plan. That's what they would say. And so you're right. I mean, ultimately, probably any kind of rebellion against God you have to have that belief on some level, whether consciously or subconsciously.
Yeah, I actually just remembered he did ask a question at the end. Did you want to address that?
Oh, he asked, I remember didn't he say like, well, West Virginia, it's legal, you can be with the animals and that's okay. So why don't you go?
That was his question. Let me go see if I can find it.
Yeah, go for it.
So the states and asking why they're not seeking the death penalty in these cases. So for the author of this invalid, unsound syllogism, I've given my justification, the principle of consent and bodily autonomy, to a moral objection to bestiality, as well as my proposed penalty. Here's my question for you in return.
Here it is.
Do you not care about the principles of consent and bodily autonomy? Is that not something that your religion advocates or values? Do you not care about helping reduce the incident rate of violations of consent and bodily autonomy?
So right now, this is what you said in the beginning, that he appeals to emotion at the end and says that you shouldn't have been appealing to emotion at the beginning. But he's appealing to your emotion right now, saying, well, don't you also care about consent? He's doing the exact same thing that he was calling you out for doing. Isn't he? Is he not?
Yeah, no, for sure. For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's funny. It didn't even really affect me that emotionally because I see the tactic for what it is, but I understand. Yeah, I think it could affect people who are, let's say, less experienced than you or myself with dealing with people like this. But yeah, I mean, again, and by the way, and I'm happy to even answer the question directly. It's like, well, sure, even though I don't view as consent as the gold standard for everything, because that also allows rampant hedonism. My moral framework, or at least the framework I submit to, goes beyond just consent. There, like we even described with the animal example, the reason why the bestiality is wrong is not just a matter of consent. There's actually even greater principles at play. But still, I'd say, sure, yeah, I think, let's prevent forcible violations of other people against their will. Abortion being, one of them. I think that's the biggest one in society. But then too, again, I mean, it's kind of irrelevant for him to bring this up, but there's 24 hours in a day, some of which we're sleeping, we're working. To make an argument like I did in this tweet does not bind me to now have to be an activist on the streets in every corner of the world, where if there is a law that is bad, I have to be protesting it with my full force. Like, that doesn't follow from my tweet. So it's just an irrelevant question to begin with.
Well, here's why he thinks it's relevant, because he thinks that if you personally think that consent is important, then you should just grant to him that atheists can act as if there are moral facts or something, because he seems like he doesn't understand what a moral fact is. But it doesn't matter. Even if you agreed with him that consent was important, if there's no God, that doesn't mean that consent or violating someone's consent is wrong just because you agree with him. Right. Everybody in the world could agree that violating people's consent was a good thing. And if there are no moral facts, it doesn't matter. And if there is a moral fact and everyone agrees on one thing and they're wrong, they're still wrong. So asking you whether or not you personally agree, what does that have to do with the question that's before us? What does it have to do with the actual argument? Nothing. It doesn't matter what your personal opinion is. I don't personally agree with God on everything that he says in the Bible. Personally, me. But I defer to his judgment. There are things that I read in the Bible and I think, well, I don't know about that. But I defer to God because he is in a higher position than I am, much higher. So when I don't understand something, I don't assume that I am the one that would know. I defer to God and I figure he knows. So I submit to his authority, to his knowledge, to his goodness, even if it doesn't seem like it makes sense to me right now based on where I'm at in my life. And this is something that atheists just cannot understand because they are putting themselves as the supreme authority. So if it doesn't make sense to them, it must not make sense.
Right. That would be interesting in a separate conversation. I'd want to explore that with you. That would be pretty fun too. Where those frictions are most arise. But I agree. I mean, I think you called it out. It's the idea, the concept of humility, of saying, hey, here's something I don't understand, but I trust the person. To an atheist, they want to hold the control for themselves as much as possible. And I mean, on the flip side, right? Like, if there is something so egregious to your sensibilities, maybe that would affect your decision whether to trust God, on some level. So I get that. But the problem is, even if, let's say, on the surface, there are some difficult passages or circumstances, which, I would argue, and you would argue, that they are all addressable. Like, it's really not a problem at the end of the day. But even if there were such difficulties, the problem is the atheist overly fixates on the small slice of difficulties compared to looking at the God of love, seeing Jesus Christ, seeing God, the Redeemer, all this stuff. The atheist doesn't even try to attempt to address the full picture of God in the Bible either. I mean, they fixate on very specific things, and it's just, it's just not, it doesn't really give off the vibes of being a good faith effort at all for a lot of these atheists who try to undertake a biblical analysis.
A biblical analysis that is going to be incredibly cherry picked and not be charitable at all with what Christians actually believe about God. Absolutely. Well, I think that's pretty much it for the video. Did you have any final thoughts on all of this? My famous friend who's being dragged through the mud by Matt Dillahunty.
I got to research Matt Dillahunty now. I mean,
Yeah, you
I got
do.
to see what I'm stepping into with. I
Yeah,
mean, it's
you
pretty
had no
wild.
idea.
You said when you were an atheist, you were watching this guy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So,
I'm very familiar with him. He's a very well-known apologist. Well, atheist apologist.
yeah,
He's a very well-known, prominent atheist. He's been going for a long time.
right. Well, yeah, no, I mean, thanks for bringing it to my attention and for doing this space here. I enjoyed the chat. Yeah, and for those listening, like, join the conversation. You know, there's the more voices, the better. Because here's the thing, right? You have people like Matt who, right, they have some sort of platform, but then you have like the young people. Let's say the young teenager who's confused, or the inexperienced person who hasn't really read the deep thinking, the Christian thinkers, the traditions, all this stuff. And those people can be swayed by those rhetoric, those emotional tactics that Daniel highlighted that Matt was using. It can actually pull people away and, you know, create lost sheep. And so if you're into apologetics, you know, follow our content, stay abreast of it, and then create some content yourself. Engage these discussions, share your thoughts, talk in the comment sections. You just might provide that one perspective that the anonymous person browsing needed to hear to prevent them from sliding off the cliff.
Absolutely. And Drago, before I sign off of here, where can people find you?
Yeah, thanks. So on Twitter at Drago Dimitrov. If you want like my more precise formulations, right? My non-tweets, go to drago.life. That's more serious work there. And lastly, I'll just say, look, Holy Habits. If you're a Christian, particularly trying to live a holier life, download the app Holy Habits on the App Store.
All right, awesome. Yeah, I just want to say Drago's a really good friend of mine. He and I talk about stuff all the time. And so I'm really honored to have him in here and to be doing this with him. This is the first time that I've ever done a stream with anybody. So it's awesome that I got to do this with you. I really appreciate you being here and everything and doing this with me. So,
Likewise.
thank you.
And to any atheists listening, I'd say, you know, take up Daniel on a lot of his challenges. Like Daniel poses some really good challenges and questions that, you know, it seems like no atheist can really address some of those $1 million questions. So be the one to take Daniel on.
Be the one. And if you do, I will admit it. I will give you credit. I'll say, hey, you're actually making an argument. Good job. Because most of the time, atheists just rely on rhetoric, or they play games like what Matt was doing here when he addressed this argument. He was very duplicitous in the way that he did it. But if you take it on head on, I will give you credit and I will readdress it. Or I'll even concede if you're correct. So I absolutely second that. I'd be happy to have a good faith conversation with any atheist. And yeah, hopefully, what do you think, Drago? Do you think Matt's going to see this?
Well, we'll throw some prayers if it's in God's will, and
Yeah.
maybe we'll see it.
Maybe he'll see it. If he does, I don't think he'll like it very much. But anyway,
Well,
I'll say you all have a wonderful day and God bless.